How does the study of the great books inform the way that I live today? So I enjoy the process of argument. What you can't see is my husband in the background nodding vigorously at that statement. I therefore grew up to be a lawyer, and I probably can't entirely blame Mr. Hendricks for that outcome, but it is the case that the Great Books tutorial was my first opportunity to have a regular forum to make an argument, to support it with evidence derived from a text, and to defend my conclusions to a group of my peers. And those are all skill sets that I continue to use on a daily basis. The operating assumption of a Great Books classroom is that difficult historical texts are amenable to critical inquiry. In the same way, difficult legal texts, whether it be a statute or a piece of scholarship or a provision of the Constitution, those are all amenable to critical inquiry too. And the questions that you pose in each context are often the same. What is the premise of the argument? Is that premise correct? What are its implications? What are the primary counter-arguments? So for me, the study of the great books really cultivated an interest in thinking and reasoning from first principles. And my vocation in law is very much informed by the process of truth-seeking that I saw modeled in the Great Books tutorial. So I aspire to be the type of lawyer who, like Socrates, has the humility to know what it is that I don't know, but also the courage and the understanding to be asking the right questions.
In my own work, being a craftsman, being a contemporary woodworker and someone that works in a highly detailed field, what I've built up as a skill of literature and learning how to read text and deal with complex ideas, I've found to be that there's really a parallel in that with my own work. Being able to understand the kind of complexity of intention that goes into any sort of craft, whether it's crafted ideas or crafted objects. I've found a sensitivity in my own reading and how I pull apart ideas. Having worked for 5 years in something that hasn't always been profitable and has brought about much doubt along the way, and kind of being dedicated to that sort of craft and that sort of intense amount of learning that you have to go through in order to even get decent results, let alone think about selling them. Yeah, I've seen in my own work as I've grown working in a craft with really high expectations for the kind of quality level. As I've grown and become more sensitive to what it means to elevate my work from kind of a beginning to an intermediate to a very professional level, and the expectations that are behind that, I've become sensitive not only to how I look at my own work, but also how I look at other people's work. And that I found that translates to all sorts of other mediums too. My ability to look at my own pipes and my own woodworking and look at every minute detail and think, can I do this better? What's going on here? How is it actually working, kind of maybe on a mechanical or constructive level? And I would also say in the sense that how is it put together? What are the processes? When I evaluate something that's put together and it's a final product, reading a book or, listening to a song, you can really appreciate that those are the same questions and the same sort of process that went behind over years and years of writing or thinking to develop their idea and to construct it and critique it before it was ever presented in a written or published form. Mm-hmm. And every year I've opened up to new levels of sensitivity. Mm-hmm. You can really start to really appreciate a piece of art, in whatever medium, the more you kind of dedicate yourself to that sensitivity, that awareness, that intention.
The great books began with reading the Iliad and the Odyssey. And you read about Achilles and Agamemnon in the Iliad. And years later, I started a business 10 years after I read the Iliad. And I remember thinking about what kind of CEO I wanted to be. I ended up raising several $1 million, building several products, managing up to 10 employees at one point. And these archetypes of Achilles and Agamemnon kept coming back to me. Achilles, the warrior who leads from the front line, sword in hand, hacking and slashing, the glorious fighter, the individual contributor. And that's totally a model of a certain type of CEO. The CEO who leads from the front, who's doing the big sales, who's closing the big accounts, who's raising the money, who's designing the product, who's kind of doing, leading by doing. And then Agamemnon, the master of the armies, the great commander-in-chief general, a totally different archetype of a totally different leader. An archetype of a leader who was a great manager, a great organizer, who, whose role was to win by strategy as opposed to by his own sword. And I kept wrestling with which one I wanted to be, and ultimately I think just having that framework in my mind was very valuable, because I ended up being able to switch between modes. At times I recognized it was important to be more like Achilles and to do. Other times I realized it was important to let other people do, and to take a step back and be more high level. But this is just one example of the unexpected but really powerful ways in which ancient literature, history, philosophy, and science can come to you and give you a source of strength to draw on the people around you don't have. Makes you feel more grounded, makes you feel more prepared, makes you feel that whatever you're trying to accomplish, there's a long lineage of people who've wrestled with the questions you're wrestling with and who've done even greater things than you're attempting to do. I think business is so much a thinking man's game. Everything about business is philosophical on some level. Even just the question of delivering value. What is valuable? How do you even think about, when somebody's willing to pay for something, why are they willing to pay for it? That's a philosophical question. So knowing how to think about philosophical questions is very valuable.
It's funny, I am in Hollywood now as a musician, but even in that career, I still find myself very blessed by the books I've read in GBT, the literature and the depth and the way, even the plays that we read, the way that it was written and communicated in the language, and all of that, I think, has still been such a huge blessing to my life.
I'm a costume and scenic designer, and I appreciate having this long and arduous sometimes history of reading through the great books, because it's given me a basis of understanding to start from in my designs even. So I know I can read through a play and pick out the themes much quicker, much easier. I enjoy doing that because I have the skills to do that. And then I'm able to interpret those or infuse those into the design of the play, which then it becomes such a richer experience for the audience member. Even if they don't necessarily pick up on that specifically intellectually, they'll get a feeling from the color palette I've chosen to represent the melancholy of the central character, or the other visual elements tie into the intellectual ones in a way that makes a richer experience for viewing.
So I'm an engineer now. I work for Google, and although maybe you look at what I do on a daily basis and it doesn't look like it applies directly to the liberal arts that I learned in great books in high school, I think really the benefit of great books to me was the wrestling of ideas and struggling through how does this relate to that, and because a lot of what I do in software is wrestle with ideas and try to fit things together. You look at all these heavy ideas you have to deal with, and there's not a right answer. There's not, a lot of times, there's not a clear cut oh, this is exactly what it is. And people have their differing opinions, and that's what it's like a lot of times in the real world, where you're looking to solve some sort of problem, or you're looking through, how are we going to make this thing work? And if you're always trying to approximate something as finding the right answer, you're not going to be able to come up with a new and innovative kind of answer. Being able to clearly communicate and effectively communicate your ideas is important, particularly when you work across like time zones or things where you can't be present with someone. And being able to clearly express your ideas in paper also helps in formulating your ideas and being able to solidify them. Although I'm an engineer, I really consider myself an artist. And I think when you look at what an artist does, they don't just seek to approximate something. An artist knows what to include, what not to include, because they have explored a bunch of different things beyond what they're going to present as their art. And so when I look at engineering, it's that same sort of thing that applies, where because I've explored these ideas, because I've wrestled with them, I've become that much better of an engineer because I have this greater context for understanding things.